definitely rewired part of my understanding on kind of the latter stages of the Roman Empire and kind of how Rome operated. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest,
Indeed.
where the Romans famously lost 3 legions.
Quintilius Varus, where are my legions?
The price of grain would double every 50 miles if you tried to trade it within the Roman Empire. How do you get vast amounts of resources to these soldiers? You buy them locally. So it
Buy
got
local.
to it. Yeah, literally, buy local.
Although you could say that the Germanic tribes have more of a reason to fight, the Roman soldiers are pretty sturdy and they know what they're there to do.
I mean, at the end of the day, those Roman soldiers knew that they were getting a nice little slice of Yorkshire after they finished. So,
well, quite. Palestine comes from Philistine, which was the enemy of the Jews, and so Rome's final kind of slap in the face to the Jews was when expelling them was to call that region Palestine.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Echo Changer podcast with myself, Jacob,
and myself, Harley.
So today, this episode is going to be a bit of a kind of attack on to the end of our last episode, or last 2 episodes rather, which were about the kind of stages of empire and how that maybe applies to different empires throughout history. So over Christmas, I got a book that I've been very much enjoying called Why Empires Fall by Peter Heather and John Rapley. I'll put the cover up on the screen just so you can see it. And it covers kind of a similar topic to what we were talking about in the last couple of episodes. But there's a lot of comparisons between kind of the Roman Empire and more modern empires. And I've really been enjoying this book. I think I haven't quite finished it yet, but it's definitely rewired part of my understanding on kind of the latter stages of the Roman Empire and kind of how Rome operated and interacted with some of the factions surrounding it, which also applies to modern empires as part of the theme of what we discussed last time, where the stages of empire kind of apply no matter what in the same way. Like they'll always kind of play out no matter who the empire is or where they're based. So I'm excited to get into this one, and it's going to be pretty good. What are your thoughts, Harley?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm excited to hear about it. It's funny that the cosmos has landed us both this book at the same time in a weird way, because I came across the interview that the authors did with Aaron Bastani from Novara Media just recently. So it's funny that when you came to me and said I've been reading this book, I thought, oh, that's funny, because just heard them in conversation. So no, it's definitely meant to be, and I'm glad you've got around to picking it up and can tell me all about it.
The universe clearly wanted us to make this podcast episode, so
I think so. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need an excuse to read or talk about the Roman Empire. So
you're always thinking about it.
It's not just a phase for me. It's not a TikTok trend. It's real life.
It's a way of
It's
life.
got to be thought about.
State of mind.
Yeah, it's a way of being. And on that note, we will get straight into it. So one of the things that really stood out to me from what I've read of the book so far is obviously the kind of the parallels that it draws between the Roman Empire and different periods of Rome and the kind of more modern empires like the British Empire, the French, the Spanish, and so on. And what I think is interesting, because it kind of, again, leans into kind of some of the stuff we talked about the last couple of episodes where, education on some topics is a bit general. And I think, especially when it comes to things like Rome is seen very much through the lens of like the empire stage. And I think a lot of people forget or don't know that, Rome was comprised of a lot of different stages, all the way from the kingdom all the way through to the Republic, the empire, and then more of like the split, which led to the Western and Eastern empires. The Eastern Empire obviously became the Byzantines, which lasted for quite a long time, and the West crumbled and fell under its own weight eventually.
That split comes out of that tension, doesn't it? It comes out of that fact that they realised they'd expanded to such an extent that there were these two poles that were sort of developing, and rather than try and say, let's keep everybody in the same tent, it was decided, okay, we need to split up in order to preserve the integrity of both, rather than have the whole thing collapse under its own weight.
Well, also, I think the split into East and West is a direct result of kind of the path that Rome was forced to take. Because obviously, when you look at the earlier stages of expansion in Rome, obviously they conquered Italy and then went further afield. They started conquering more of France, or which was known as Gaul, more of kind of Spain and Greece, around the Balkans, obviously Britain as well. They expanded to such an extent that obviously at the very height of the Roman Empire, they had land that spanned all the way from the Scottish border all the way towards Egypt, and beyond in some cases as well. So this was an absolutely insanely huge, empire and landmass at the time. In context of kind of when they existed, that was the whole world to them. That was all that they knew existed for all they had explored so far, and before they'd even interacted with any further afield civilizations.
The Americas were a totally unknown quantity at this point.
Oh yeah, like a completely alien concept. I mean, there's always kind of there's some interest in kind of the potential interactions that Rome maybe had with ancient China as well, which is something that we could definitely delve into at some point, because I think that would be quite interesting. I don't personally know a lot about it, but
that would be really interesting.
So that would be quite one to dive into. But I think when we look at Rome, an empire, it obviously feeds back into the overall stage of empire. So we start off with kind of the pioneering phase, like I mentioned last time, which is a marginalized group or a very small kingdom, which is usually under the thumb of a larger power, or a regional power that obviously has the military dominance, the economic dominance, and so on. But then through certain circumstances, that smaller power is able to grow and grow and grow, challenge the imperial power, and take over. In the case of Rome, that played out, textbook in the way that we can see in history books, where obviously it rose up as a smaller power, became big, then transitioned from republic into empire, conquered more land, developed more resources, and took over. But the key kind of factor in Roman conquest was that their conquest was driven by economic factors. It was driven by wanting to expand the economy, expand the population and military might and stuff. But if there was a land that they saw that they had to fight over and it wasn't worth keeping, they wouldn't sell it, they wouldn't conquer it. Like, if it was an economically unviable thing to do, they wouldn't do it. So the extent that they expanded to at the peak was the extent of land in which they actually felt was worthwhile. So we obviously always talk about when it comes to talking about the decline of Rome and the decline of empires, it's this notion that they stretch themselves too thin. They get a bit too greedy, a bit too ahead of themselves in terms of trying to conquer and conquer and conquer. But I think with Rome it's interesting because the more they expanded, the less Rome-centric the empire became.
Yeah.
So what I mean by this is that obviously at the start we always look at Rome and we think of an empire as like one country that conquers other places and takes all their resources and brings them all home, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I think it starts getting interesting is that Rome obviously expanded to such an extent that they controlled land in Britain, they controlled land in Africa, they controlled land in the Balkans, all those other areas, right? They were very far away from each other. The transport that they had at the time didn't allow them to really move things very quickly. I think there's one of the mentions in the book is that the price of grain would double every 50 miles if you tried to trade it within the Roman Empire.
Oh wow, that's interesting. An interesting stat.
Which is crazy when you consider, like, obviously even Italy itself is quite a big place. So the fact that like the trade would still be really expensive from one end of Italy to the other, I think is also quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, it shows the kind of extent to which localism is a factor pre-globalization, I mean, you could say the Silk Road is the start of globalization, but pre kind of modern industrialized globalization, should we say, that little communities are that's the whole world in that area. So to reach out, to reach beyond is a massive step in the way that we don't even think about now, because we can order something from far afield and it arrives with us sort of within a week. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting point, and actually, the later in the book, where they kind of do more of a comparison between, and they compare what I've just talked about logistically with Rome, with the British Empire, for instance, and I think it's interesting because at a glance, you would assume that it wouldn't things wouldn't play out in exactly kind of the same way, right? Because we had railways. I'm going to sneeze as well. I'm going to really quickly take a quick second. You can really feel the sneeze, and I think when you're on a podcast, you don't factor in sneezing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, it humanizes us, doesn't it?
We're real. We're not AI. We're real people.
People realize, much as they might think we're these lofty geniuses, really, it's good to just show them that we're at heart we're just like them, really. So
we're just two normal dudes talking about history. Guys. That's just how it is.
But British Empire, Roman Empire.
Yeah. So you would assume, based off the fact that we can look back at the Roman Empire and look at that statement itself, right, that a cart of grain would double in price every 50 miles, right, and then we compare that to the British Empire in sort of the 1800s or so, where we had railways, ships, all kinds of global trade. The British Empire spanned across the whole world, pretty much. But it's interesting that some of the parallels that the book mentions about Rome play out in exactly the same way with the British Empire. Most notably in places like India, which I'll cover in a bit. But sticking to Rome for a second. So we're talking about like logistics, right? So Rome has expanded to this great size. They span all the way from Britain to Egypt.
Yeah.
What is happening in Rome at this point is that whereas Rome as the Republic used to be very Rome centric and very centered on the city of Rome and the surrounding region, as the empire expanded, it became more and more costly for resources from Rome to be traded to the far flung kind of lands of Britain and so on. So when Rome colonized or conquered these places rather than colonized, when they conquered these places, they established regional government, they established infrastructure, they established kind of farmland, agricultural practices, all the different things that they had in Rome. They would establish them in these, far-flung regions of the empire. And with that, the dependency on resources from Rome dropped. So all of a sudden, if you're a Roman regional bureaucrat and you own like 3 farms in like Yorkshire, right? It wasn't called Yorkshire obviously back then. Let's be real, but just for context for modern viewers,
Yorkshire or something. Yeah,
yeah, Yorkshire, yeah.
Jorvik, or no, actually
that's more Viking, isn't it?
Exactly.
But you get the point. So. If you're a regional Roman bureaucrat and you own 3 farms, you're real landowner empire, right, in Yorkshire, Northern England, and you need grain. You're not going to import grain from Rome. You're going to learn how to grow it yourself.
Of course,
and try because it's cheaper.
The import tax would be insane to just cover the cost of its travelling from A to B.
Well, again, imagine that cart of grain doubling in price every 50 miles from middle Italy to Scotland.
Yeah, that's mental, isn't it? Yeah.
That's a lot of doubling.
Exactly.
So this kind of played out in a lot of different ways. Obviously, Rome itself as an entity became a lot richer because of the different places that it ruled, and obviously the power was consolidated within Rome. That's where the government, the imperial government was, where like the emperor was, and there was a lot of emphasis on Rome still. But the longer that as time went on, and Rome wasn't necessarily conquering loads of new places, but they were sort of consolidating what they had. These different regions developed economically, and they developed their own industry, their own farming, their own kind of regional government, and their own ways of working. And they start working, interlinked. Colonies in Gaul would be maybe trading with colonies in southern England. Like,
Yeah.
this is something that was very, these things took place before the Romans, and they took place during the Romans as well,
Yeah.
and they took place after the Romans. But what's interesting is that obviously as time goes on, you would expect, based on our kind of modern understanding of empire or our assumptions about empire, that as the empire expanded and developed these different places, that all of the power and all of the wealth and all of the kind of development would be centered around the capital, when it really wasn't the case. So
Well, and it's sort of, little capitals are going to pop up everywhere, and there's going to be centres because of that distance, as you say, that doubling of price every 50 miles. You're going to have nice little local centres of power, and also I think another parallel with the British. I don't know if they bring it up in the book, is the sort of ruling through local chiefs, local kings, all that kind of stuff. I think in certain areas it was direct rule. I think probably in Britain it was more of a direct rule because it was quite difficult to get the various tribes to work with them and to work together and all that kind of stuff. But certainly in in the Middle East, you had sort of King Herod in I want to say Jerusalem, but in sort of Palestine slash
the Levant.
Israel. Yeah, the Levant. Yeah. Well, actually, and it's an interesting side note. It's actually called Palestine Palestine comes from Philistine, which was the enemy of the Jews, and so Rome's final kind of slap in the face to the Jews was, when expelling them, was to call that region Palestine. Just an interesting historical note. But you've got, if you're ruling through local leaders, those local leaders are going to be far more powerful and far more savvy, and they're going to pick things up from you than if you are doing everything for everybody. So if you're kind of the be all and end all, and then you leave, everybody goes, well, what do? We don't know, because we didn't, nobody showed us what we were doing. Whereas if you're quite light touch, like in certain regions, like they were there, it's a different sort of story. So when we have the same thing with the British and the Mughals, there's heavy-handed stuff going on in certain places, but overall it's ruling through secondary, through local leaders, and so those leaders are going to look at it and go, this is interesting. I can get this out of it. I can learn how to do this. I can learn from this presence in a way that maybe I couldn't have if they were totally running everything.
Yeah, and also I know one of the kind of the follow-ons from that is that obviously, as regions develop and they sort of, get more accustomed to running their own region rather than necessarily being ruled by someone else directly, the runoff is that obviously they become very self-sufficient. They form their own connections with local regions that are around them, and they obviously build their own kind of soft power base. I mean, with Rome, obviously when they conquered a land, they would bring, Roman structures of government. They would bring Roman agriculture and building techniques and military formations and all these other things. And over time, all these regions would learn from the Romans, and that was kind of the idea. They were Romanizing different places. They were turning them into more parts that were like Rome. Obviously, we know that the kind of expansion of Rome was really kind of, it met a stalemate really on the borders of Germania, with all the Germanic tribes. So this would have been along the Rhine and the Tiber, and not the Tiber, it's the Danube.
Yes.
So the Rhine and the Danube rivers were sort of the main kind of border areas, at least. And there were a lot of skirmishes. There were a lot of wars that were fought. There were a lot of really intense battles. Obviously, most notably the Battle of Teutoburg Forest,
Indeed.
where the Romans famously lost 3 legions. we'll cover more on that in the future.
Quintilius Varus, where are my legions?
Yeah, Varus, give me back my legions. Very famously. So yeah.
Little side note. Shout out to I Claudius because it's 50 years this year. Now that we're in 2026, 50 years this year since I Claudius came out, and Brian Blessed. It's worth looking up just the clip, if nothing else. Brian Blessed, Quintilius Varus, where are my legions? It's classic stuff.
Yeah, amazing. But yeah, no, definitely check it out. We'll also put up a little poster or something on the screen as well.
Oh yeah. You can't beat it. It's just glorious melodrama.
Yeah, it's very, very good. But you know, so yeah, we've got lots of different battles that are going on in Rome, between Rome and the Germanic tribes. So over time, obviously, there's a lot of Roman victories. I mean, predominantly Roman victories against sort of singular tribes, but occasionally you would get the Germanic tribes kind of forming confederations together against the Romans. Obviously, they'd be a lot more powerful, more organized, more able to kind of, you know, fight against Roman tactics. Because even, I mean, it's seen a lot of times in Roman military victories, how there's a lot of battles where, you know, numerically they're outnumbered by their enemies, but the kind of, you know, the sophistication and the efficiency of Roman military tactics at the time just allowed them to beat much more numerous enemies on the battlefield, especially in open terrain as well. But over time,
it's a technology thing, isn't it? It's a bit like the Battle of Agincourt with just to go sideways
with the longbows.
It's totally the longbows. It's the paradigm shift, isn't it? There's no you know what, and they say the great, you know, war is good for the development of technology, because you have this thing of it really shows up. It's that crisis moment of like, what is the state of our technology? Because if the state of your technology is poorer than your enemies, it's bringing a knife to a gunfight. You know, it's not gonna work out for you.
Unless you've got like a massive like 1,000 to 1 ratio or something of troops.
Yeah. And the only instances where the reverse can be true, like in the case of Abyssinians against Italians, is when morale is on the side of the force with the more basic technology. If there's no morale, you can have all the best gear in the world. If you've got all the gear and no idea, then it's not gonna, you know. But you know, Rome, they're highly disciplined troops, highly motivated. They want their land back home when they've completed their battles and XYZ. So they're well motivated and well fed and they understand what they're there to do. So obviously they have, although you could say that the Germanic tribes have more of a reason to fight, the Roman soldiers are pretty sturdy and they know what they're there to do.
I mean, at the end of the day, those Roman soldiers knew that they were getting a nice little slice of Yorkshire after they finished. So,
well, quite, yeah. And that's eventually how you end up with. And we talked before about the arc of various families. That's the kind of, you know, he's the sort of granddaddy, if you like, of this family, and he gets his little plot in, you know, somewhere, as you say, in Yorkshire, and from there he builds, and eventually he ends up with a sort of a senator, you know, his sort of grandson or great grandson's a sort of senator, because, you know, the Senate is made up of landowners. So it's all in the big cycle.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, obviously, a lot of Rome was centered around the military and military service, and a lot of citizens were very heavily rewarded for military service as well. You know, they received a good amount of money, they received land, honors, and other things like that. Sometimes routes into politics. But yeah, I mean, also quick shout out as well. We're talking about military tactics in the ancient world. I would be remiss without mentioning the Macedonians. Under Alexander the Great.
I was actually going to mention them myself. Funny how we're so in tune here.
I was just on the same wavelength. I mean, again, I don't need an excuse to talk about Macedon and Alexander the Great. Incredible part of history, and I cannot wait to the episode that I talk about.
And the Persians, and that's I'm sure you're about to say, you know, against the Persians. It's like, well, I don't know what the ratio. Maybe you can tell me what the ratio of Macedonian to Persian soldiers is, but like, the Persians have leagues more men,
A
but
lot
they
more.
have no morale.
Unmotivated
And
because
no,
they were conscripted. It was
yeah.
completely different.
And abysmal tactics, just absolutely
Mm.
abysmal tactics.
Well, obviously, a lot of fighting in that region was kind of cavalry driven, alongside kind of large infantry assaults, like
Yeah,
frontal assaults as well. But obviously,
yeah,
with the Macedonians had the phalanx. Obviously, they had the long spears, a little longer than usual spears, which are called
yeah.
sarissas. And that obviously allowed them to kind of have this almost like porcupine shaped formation, where they're even in some cases able to actually quite effectively block arrows from hitting the formation at large, by just waving the top ones around, because it would put
And what a kind of that's interesting.
it would
Yeah.
kind of hit the arrows and knock them off course and stuff like that.
Oh
So
wow, that's cool. Yeah.
very very cool. But yeah, I just had a little side note to talk about.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah. Before we leave that, it's interesting. I had always imagined the phalanx as a Roman innovation, but I suppose it's either Macedonian, perhaps, or even older. Maybe is
Well,
it?
the Macedonians were
You can
before
tell
them.
me. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's news to me that it exists. That the Romans didn't invent it. Essentially, that it's it's coming from either Macedon or perhaps I don't know if the kind of Athenians before them had used it or what, but that's news to me that Rome pinched it from Greece essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite revolutionary for the tactic at the time. I mean, obviously, with the Macedon sort of subjugated the other Greek city-states at the time before they went on the war with Persia, so they kind of
Yeah,
then shared the tactics and so on and so forth. And obviously, when Rome expanded into Greece, I mean, a lot of Greece was quite happy with Rome kind of, administering security for them.
well,
So I think there was a lot.
that's the great thing that Rome builds on, because of course Rome pinches pretty much everything from Greece in terms of culture.
Well, they
And,
modelled themselves on Greece.
and yeah, exactly. But the one thing the Greeks weren't so good at that the Romans were is law and sort of law and order, if you like.
Well, direct democracy.
And so I suppose in that sense the Greeks are like, hey, they're like us, but they're just a bit better at security than we were.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So
They had better
sense
bouncers.
yeah, well, quite. Yeah, it would make sense that they'd welcome them in, because it's basically like looking in the mirror, like looking at an version of you that's been to the gym a bit more. So it's good.
That's a good way of putting it. To be fair, but yeah, going back to the overall topic. I mean, so back to the kind of Germanic tribes. We'll take it back to the Roman border regions with Germania.
Yeah.
So over time, obviously they had lots of different wars, battles, skirmishes, you name it, with the Germanic tribes along the whole border. And as a result of that, naturally, the Romans then felt the need to station quite a large concentration of troops on that border. I mean, in the book itself references around kind of, about 20 to 25,000 troops sort of stationed on the German border, in different legions and so on, to kind of both probably, deter some tribes from attacking, but also, make sure that they're always ready for a fight no matter where. And this kind of creates a stalemate where, the Romans don't really want to go much further because there's not really much real benefit to them doing it. When they were conquering other bits of land, it's because it was worthwhile, and there was a lot of their economy was agricultural. So where they conquered land that was, very good for certain crops, or it was good for livestock, or it was good for certain other things, that made it worthwhile to keep it integrated into the empire. Whereas if there were lands that were maybe not very, economically beneficial to Rome, or the local population is really putting up a fight and they are not going to be conquered, is it really worth the manpower, the money that it takes to subjugate these places?
Well, that's just like Scotland, isn't it? It's the same thing. It's and going back to Quintilius Varus, Where Are My Legions? It's the same. You've got the famous, what's that great film, Centurion, with Michael Fassbender, about the that lost legion that goes into Scotland to fight the Picts and never comes back. So they're looking at it going, well, what do we get? England, fine, we've got these nice low-lying lands, nice undulating green hills, we can grow lots of things, it's all good. They're looking up into the Highlands and going, well, it's all...
What's the point?
What can we grow? What's the point? What are we gonna... Okay, maybe we could make some of it work, but is it really worth the fight with this very intense, fiery people? A lot like the Germanic, similarly to the Germanic tribes. And so, Hadrian's Wall is the...
Hadrian's Wall went up, as we all know.
Yeah.
So obviously, there was a bit of a stalemate that then was created along the German border. And this lasted for decades, this lasted for a very long time. And as a result of this, somewhat ironically, because obviously you have 20 to 25,000 troops in a certain region, they need a lot of food. They need a lot of things to keep them supplied.
That's a lot of material.
Ready to fight. That's a lot of things. And as we know and have discussed so far on this episode, the price of a cart of grain doubles every 50 miles that you go from Rome. So how do you get vast amounts of resources to these soldiers? You buy them locally. So it got to it. Yeah, literally, buy local. I mean, it got to the point where obviously there were surrounding settlements in the Roman Empire, kind of side, that were obviously held the bulk of supply for these soldiers and held the most of responsibility for kind of supplying these regions and stuff. But there were tribes and settlements on the German side that supplied food and things to Rome in return for weapons or food, different things that they could trade. They still traded. So you had this situation where I guess a good comparison of this, right, would almost be look at North Korea and South Korea. You have I can't remember, is it the 38th parallel? Whatever I can't remember. 39th parallel, that's what it was. Obviously, where they have the demilitarized zone between the two. And now imagine that both countries traded with each other through settlements on that border constantly with the same rhetoric that they have now, but doing that is essentially what was happening pretty much. It's kind of mad that because they obviously hadn't been fighting on scale for like a long time, so a trade relationship kind of just developed.
Yeah, and I suppose that's also the benefit of dealing with tribes, isn't it? Because like in Britain, you've got the tribes who are fiercely resistant, like I think it's the Iceni. That Boudica springs up from. Good old Boudica.
Yep.
But you've also got tribes who are calmer, who are less kind of, who think, well, this isn't all that bad, and I guess we could sort of make it work. So if you're dealing with one political unit that is the Roman Empire versus all these teeny tiny little tribal entities, all you've got to do is kind of play them off against each other, form a loyalty with one,
divide and conquer,
one over here. Yeah, exactly, divide and conquer. And they don't even have to do the dividing because they're already divided. So it's nice.
Well, yeah, they already hate each other, so it's not that hard.
Yeah. or if they don't hate each other, they're not speaking to each other, or they're speaking different languages, or they're whatever it is, they're not gonna. It's going to be very difficult. And I think Boudica manages to an extent because I think she gets together. I can't remember what the other tribe is, but there is a tribe that the Iceni get together with to make it all happen to fight against the Romans. But it is tricky to make that happen because there's just so many different moving parts and everybody's got their own agendas. And so the Romans are laughing because they're going, well, this is easy peasy. We've got central government and they're all scattered,
divided and scattered around.
Four winds. Yeah.
Well, actually, that brings us to the next sort of stage, and this is where it gets interesting because Rome did, in fact, think that they had that complacent attitude of thinking, all right, well, we're pretty happy with this arrangement. It's not really hurting us. We also don't have to pay for. We obviously have to pay for the resources, but we're also not having to pay all of the extra fees for transporting millions and millions of carts of grain at 5 billion times the price. So. Yeah. The Romans might take one of the sons of the tribe leader or someone and send them to Rome for like a Roman education.
The empire sort of is almost regretting the fact that they've provided him with this education, which he then uses to shake off the shackles of empire.
But through doing this, Rome is in the complacent position of the empire, which thinks that no one can ever challenge them because they beat them militarily. You know, they have a larger economy.
I was going to say it's the old student becomes the master thing. It's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. Eventually, if you teach them too well, they're going to turn on you and off you.
All the European empires, especially the British Empire, had sacrificed so many people from different nations that were part of the empire. They couldn't ask them to do any more. So you can perfectly understand how these countries were so like, you know, we've done our part now, let us go.